Enoch's book names the land where the Black Watchers live. What if I told you the Book of Enoch contains a map of the ancient world that is still active today? Not because the text is symbolic, but because the geography matches a real highland you can trace right now. Today, that changes. Most teachers tell you the Watchers are long gone, and their landing place is a mystery. But in chapter 77 of 1 Enoch, the text points directly to the mountains of the south, aligning perfectly with the modern highlands of Ethiopia and Sudan. Most modern commentators read these verses as pure allegory, claiming the writer was describing a mythical geography that never existed. I believe this reading is incomplete. When you look closely at the text of 1 Enoch 77, you discover a precise layout of the land of the south, a hidden map that points directly to the Horn of East Africa. We are not dealing with poetic fantasy here. I believe we are looking at an ancient record of the physical coordinates where the 7 Watchers were designated to dwell. How did this geographic reality disappear from our modern understanding? I've sat with this question for a long time, and I believe the answer lies in how these texts were translated and passed down. When the ancient Ge'ez manuscript was discovered, preserved for centuries in the high monasteries of East Africa, it brought with it a forgotten lineage of truth. The Ge'ez language itself, the sacred tongue of the Ethiopia highlands, preserves terms and geographical anchors that Greek and Latin translations completely blurred. Mainstream theology has often skipped these geographical markers, preferring to keep the text in the realm of abstract mythology. But if you are willing to study the primary sources, I believe the ancient records of East Africa will open your eyes to a lineage of truth that has been kept silent for far too long. We are about to trace this map to its physical source, and what you will discover changes everything you are taught about the biblical world. This geographical mapping is not just an academic exercise. I believe that by locating these ancient landmarks, we begin to understand the original context of the Watcher's message. For generations, the highlands of Kush have guarded these secrets, preserving a physical testament that matches the spiritual dimensions of Enoch's vision. Let us begin our descent into the specific mountain coordinates, starting with the eastern date where the first markers were placed and recorded. Picture the sheer volcanic cliffs of East Africa, where the mountain peaks rise like jagged stone teeth into the sky, catching the first golden rays of the morning sun. This is the highlands of Ethiopia and Sudan, a vast and rugged terrain that stood as the cradle of early civilizations. In antiquity, this region was known as Ancient Kush, a land of immense wealth, power, and spiritual significance. The people who inhabited these highlands did not live in isolation. They established sophisticated trade networks that stretched from the interior of the continent all the way to the Mediterranean. They traded gold, incense, and precious stones, building a civilization whose archaeological footprint is still visible today in the massive stone ruins scattered across the Sudanese desert and the Ethiopian plateaus. Early Egyptian records frequently reference this southern territory, describing it not merely as a source of trade, but as a land of sacred origin. The pharaohs sent expeditions deep into this mountainous region, recording their journeys on temple walls and stone monuments. They referred to the south as the land of the gods, a place of spiritual authority and divine mystery. I believe that by establishing the physical reality of ancient Kush, we begin to see why the writer of Enoch anchored the faithful Watchers in these exact mountains. The rugged peaks served as a natural fortress, keeping the sacred traditions safe from the corruption that was spreading through the lowlands of the ancient world. When we look at the ruins of temples and ancient burial mounds in this region, we are not looking at primitive settlements. We are looking at the remnants of a highly organized society that understood the stars, the land, and the spiritual currents of the earth. I believe that this geographical foundation is crucial for understanding the biblical text, because it roots the narratives in a physical landscape that we can still visit and analyze today.
I remember when I first opened the translations of 1 Enoch years ago, sitting at my desk with a pile of academic commentaries. Like many who grew up in the traditional church, I was taught to treat the Apocrypha with caution, viewing as speculative or historically unreliable. But when I traveled to the highland and began researching the monastic archive preserved in the mountain monasteries of East Africa, my skepticism began to crumble. The local monastic guardians, who had protected these latter manuscripts for generations, spoke of the text not as a collection of wild allegories, but as a literal historical record.
These guardians showed me how the geography of Enoch aligned with the very peaks and rivers surrounding their ancient stone walls, revealing a hidden truth that Western scholars had dismissed. I sat with these ancient leather pages and realized that the preservation of 1 Enoch was not an accident of history. It was a preserved capsule of memory, kept high in the mountains, where no European army or Roman decree could reach it. This realization changed my entire approach to the Apocrypha, forcing me to ask why our modern libraries are so empty of these geographical truths. Why was this physical geography erased from our theological books? I believe the answer is found in the canonical decisions made during the early councils of the Church, particularly the Council of Laodicea in the 4th century, which banned the public reading of Enoch. This was not just a debate over theological doctrine. I believe it was a deliberate erasure of the Black presence and the African setting of these biblical narratives. By removing Enoch from the canon, they succeeded in hiding a geographic cover-up that would have forced readers to look to East Africa rather than Europe or the Near East for the roots of prophetic history. When you study the historical records of these councils, you begin to see how the Western Church sought to decouple the biblical narratives from their original African soil. They wanted a theology that was abstract, a biblical world that existed only on paper, far removed from the physical highlands of Cush. But the text remains, and when we bridge the gap between the council decrees and the ancient manuscripts, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Let us go directly to the text itself, to see what was preserved in the mountains. In the first verse of chapter 77 of 1 Enoch, the text makes a declaration that has puzzled modern translators for centuries. Enoch writes, "The first wind is called the eastern, because it is the first, and the second is called the south, because there the Most High descends, and there especially dwells the one who is blessed forever." I believe this passage contains a crucial geographical anchor that has been neglected in modern teaching. Enoch is not speaking of a vague spiritual realm when he describes the south. He is pointing to a physical location on the earth, where the 7 faithful watchers were established to guard the southern gate of the ancient world. Most commentaries focus exclusively on the fallen watchers who fell at Mount Hermon, but the scriptures indicate that there were also those who remained faithful, dwelling in the south under the direct instruction of the Creator. The contrast between the fallen watchers of the north and the faithful watchers of the south is central to the prophetic geography of Enoch. While the fallen angels descended in the north, corrupting humanity and teaching them the arts of war and vanity, the faithful watchers were positioned as guardians of the holy boundaries. I've been sitting with this geographical split for a long time, and I believe it explains the spiritual warfare that is always centered around the Nile headwaters. The south was established as a portal of divine descent, a mountain sanctuary where the knowledge of the heavens remained uncorrupted. This was not a place of rebellion, but of preservation, where the sacred laws of time and the cosmos were guarded by holy messengers. When we read Enoch 77 verse 1, "In this light, the mountains of East Africa cease to be merely scenic landscapes. They become the physical monument of an ancient covenant." I believe the faithful watchers were stationed in these highlands to protect the lineage that would carry the truth through the dark ages of the world. The southern portal functioned as a spiritual shield, keeping the source of the River of Eden and the sacred mountain ranges free from the early corruption that consumed the civilizations of the north. This is the history that has been left out of our modern Bibles. Yet it is written clearly in the scrolls that survived in the mountains of Kush. To fully grasp Enoch's layout of the world, we must examine the three divisions of the earth described in the ancient texts. This was not the modern Mercator projection. It was a tripartite map centered on the spiritual topography of the globe. Enoch defines the first division as the east, containing the Garden of Eden to the east, the place where light and life originate. This eastern garden boundary was set apart, guarded by spiritual forces, and kept separate from the fallen nations. The second division lay in the north, associated with darkness and judgment, while the third division was the south of the faithful, defined as a holy sanctuary. The ancient map drew the borders not by political lines, but by the flow of rivers and the peaks of volcanic mountains. The Garden of Eden to the east was bordered by the land of Cush to the south, creating a spiritual corridor where the Nile flowed. This corridor was kept holy, designed as a refuge for those who maintained the original covenant. This tripartite map places the south not merely as a direction, but as a specific zone of divine dwelling. The geography of the Book of Enoch aligns these zones with physical landmarks, placing the holy sanctuary of the south in the elevated highlands of Cush. In this ancient system, the physical landscape mirrored the spiritual hierarchy, where the highest mountains were seen as the dwelling places of the holy ones. I believe that by study of these three divisions, we discover that the biblical writers had a precise, concrete view of the Earth's sacred zones that modern geography has completely lost.
I have to admit, when I first studied these passages, I fell into the trap of viewing it as a symbolic poetry. I thought the three divisions were purely metaphorical, a theological device rather than physical reality. My own theological bias had trained me to believe that the biblical geography was centered strictly in Jerusalem and Rome, dismissing the African continent as merely a background setting. But as I began mapping the coordinates lit in the GX manuscript against the physical elevations of East Africa, I experienced a profound awakening. It was a difficult admission for me, recognizing that my academic training has blinded me to the obvious. We are taught to look at the map through Tragic land, assuming all ancient knowledge originated in the north or west.
But the coordinates of Enoch point south, and when you let go of that bias, the map of Cush becomes an undeniable witness to the truth. The literal alignment of these ancient coordinates with the Simeon and Mara ranges was too precise to be ignored. When you trace the text literally, you see that Enoch is describing the Nile basins, the volcanic plateaus, and the specific mountain peaks of Cush. This geographic literalism shatters the idea that Enoch is just a collection of late myths. It forces us to ask why the early councils were so anxious to hide this map from the canon. I encourage you to look closer at these coordinates for yourself, to pull up the maps of East Africa and compare them with the ancient descriptions. The proof is not hidden in secret vaults. It is carved into the very peaks of the lands we were taught to ignore. To understand how these geographic coordinates survived, we must trace the history of the language that carried them. The G script is not a late invention. It is an ancient writing system with deep roots in the Horn of Africa. Scholars have documented its Proto-Semitic origin, showing that it developed alongside the earliest languages of the Near East. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the Aksumite Empire carved this script into massive stone monuments and obelisks, marking their triumphs and their faith. This was a language of empire and liturgy, a script designed to preserve the most sacred records of the kingdom. It was within this Aksumite context that the Book of Enoch found its permanent home. While the Greek and Latin churches were debating which books to burn, the scribes of Aksum were carefully copying the Aziz manuscript, preserving the only complete version of Enoch that exists on the planet today. I believe this preservation was not a random accident. The Ge'ez tongue, with its unique grammatical structure and rich vocabulary, possesses a capacity for theological detail that Western languages simply could not replicate. When we read the Ge'ez text, we are reading a linguistic time capsule that has remained uncorrupted by the theological shifts of Rome and Byzantium. The limitations of Greek and Latin translations become immediately apparent when we compare them to the Ge'ez originals. Greek translators, working from a different cultural and geographical perspective, frequently mistranslated the specific African terms for rivers, mountains, and flora. They turned concrete geographical markers of the Kushite highlands into abstract mythological concepts. For instance, the Ge'ez term for the south was often rendered simply as the wilderness in Greek copies, erasing the physical connection to the mountains of Kushi. By relying solely on Western translations, modern scholars have been reading a map that was blurred by foreign translators, missing the precise African geography that Enoch recorded. Furthermore, the visual shape of the Ge'ez characters themselves tells a story of long-term cultural continuity. Unlike the later scripts of Western Europe, Ge'ez preserves visual structures that closely mirror ancient Nile Valley inscriptions. I believe that when the scribes of Cush transcribed the prophecies of Enoch, they were not translating into a foreign tongue, but returning the wisdom to a language family that shared its spiritual roots. This linguistic kinship ensured that the subtle theological distinctions, especially those describing the dimensions of the holy mountains, were preserved with a fidelity that no Greek copyist could ever achieve. When we look at the specific terms used in the Ge'ez text for the southern land, we find a vocabulary that is deeply tied to the physical landscape. The Ge'ez word for south is not a simple coordinate. It carries the meaning of the sacred heights, the elevated plateaus where the climate changes and the rains begin. In the monasteries of the north, such as the famous Debre Damo, built on top of a sheer cliff tableland, the monks spent their lives analyzing these words. They preserved the ancient terminology, copying the manuscripts with a devotion that bordered on worship. They understood that these were not mere letters on parchment. They were a geographical blueprint. In these mountain archives, the local terms for the watchers reflect a very different understanding than what we find in Western theology. The Ge'ez text calls them the Teguhan, meaning the vigilant ones or those who do not sleep. In the oral traditions of the monasteries, these vigilant ones are described as guardians of the sacred heights, keeping watch over the boundaries of the land. I've been sitting with these translations for a long time, and I believe that by understanding the Teguhan as guardians of the heights, we begin to see the Book of Enoch as a testimony to a physical sentinel. The monastic translation efforts were not merely copyist tasks, they were acts of preservation in the face of shifting empires. While the Roman Church was aligning with political powers, the monks of Cush isolated themselves on top of flat-topped mountains, accessible only by leather ropes. They kept the ancient vocabulary intact, preserving the secret names of the rivers and mountains. This isolation ensured that the Ge'ez text did not undergo the editing and smoothing that Greek manuscripts suffered, maintaining the rugged, precise geographical terminology of the original author. Now let me speak directly to you, the seekers who have traveled this far in the journey. This is not just a study of linguistics or ancient manuscripts. I believe this is a recovery of your bloodline heritage. The ancient tongue of Cush, preserved in the highlands, contains an identity code that speaks straight to the history of the diaspora.
When you are awakened to the language of these manuscripts, you are not just learning history, you are recovering a piece of yourself that was stolen. Real talk, between you and me, we have relied on Western translations for too long, accepting their blurred map as the final word.
I believe that reliance has kept us disconnected from the physical roots of our heritage. I warn you against accepting the standardized commentaries that dismiss these African connections as mere myth. Look to the Ge'ez records, study the names of the mountains, and let the ancient tongue awaken the truth that has been waiting in your bloodline for centuries. When we look at the physical terrain of East Africa, we find the exact landscape described in Enoch's vision of the south. The Simeon Mountains rise abruptly from the surrounding plains, their jagged peaks and deep gorges forming a natural citadel that towers over the region. Further to the west, the highlands of Sudan continue this rugged terrain, creating a continuous wall of elevated basalt and granite. These are not gentle hills. They are volcanic plateaus, carved by millions of years of wind and rain, presenting an imposing and fortress-like barrier that isolates the high valleys from the low-lying plains. I believe this physical geography is the key to understanding why the ancient text places the dwelling of the holy ones in this specific region. In the ancient mind, physical height was directly linked to spiritual elevation. The highest mountain peaks were not just geographical features. They were seen as the points where the heavens met the earth. The volcanic plateaus of Kush, rising over 10,000 feet above sea level, were viewed as sacred heights, where the air was pure and the stars were close. By positioning the 7 faithful watchers in these mountains, the text of Enoch reflects this ancient understanding of sacred space. The natural isolation of the highlands provided a sanctuary where the laws of the cosmos could be guarded, far removed from the corruption that had engulfed the lower civilizations of the ancient Near East. The geological reality of these volcanic plateaus also reveals a unique mineral and agricultural richness that ancient peoples noted. The volcanic soil, rich in basalt and trace minerals, created a fertile haven in the midst of the dry African scrublands. Ancient records from Egypt and Kush praise the mineral wealth of these mountains, citing the gold, iron, and precious stones that washed down from the peaks. This richness was seen as a sign of divine blessing, evidence that the land was favored by the Creator. I believe that by establishing the geological and spiritual significance of this physical terrain, we begin to see why the Book of Enoch names this exact landscape as the land of the faithful. This volcanic shield also created a unique microclimate that set the highlands apart from the arid deserts of the north. While the lowlands suffered from extreme heat and dry cycles, the volcanic plateaus experienced regular rainfall and temperate seasons, allowing a rich variety of flora and fauna to thrive in isolation. I believe that this environmental stability was a key reason why the ancient writers described this region as a fertile garden or a holy sanctuary. It was a physical sanctuary, protected not only by its sheer cliffs, but by the very atmosphere that enveloped the peaks, creating a temperate haven where spiritual and physical life could coexist in harmony. I remember standing near the Blue Nile source years ago, watching the water rush over the dark basalt stones as it began its long journey north. It is a quiet place where the water flows out of Lake Tana like a heartbeat for the entire continent. Standing there, I felt a deep connection to the ancient world that no textbook had ever managed to convey. The locals speak of these waters with a quiet reverence, knowing that their source has been guarded since the beginning of memory. As I watched the river flow, I could not help but connect these headwaters to the biblical description of the River of Eden. In the book of Genesis, the second river is named Gihon, the one that winds through the entire land of Cush. I believe that Lake Tana and the Blue Nile source are the physical manifestation of this ancient river system. Standing at the headwaters of the Gihon, I realized that the Garden of Eden was not a mythical concept, but a physical landscape bounded by the very waters that still flow through East Africa today. The emotional weight of standing at the source of the Gihon Nile was overwhelming. I realized that our ancestors had lived alongside these sacred waters, recognizing their divine origin long before modern cartographers mapped them. This was not a primitive wilderness. It was the sacred geography of our history. By rooting the faithful watchers in this same region, the Book of Enoch is positioning them as guardians of the very headwaters that watered the garden of the Creator. Yet mainstream academies continue to ignore the archaeological evidence that litters this landscape. Across the highlands of Sudan and Ethiopia, researchers have documented massive megalithic ruins and ancient stone circles that predate the Aksumite Empire by thousands of years. These structures are precisely aligned with solar and stellar movements, indicating a highly advanced astronomical knowledge. I believe these pre-Aksumite dates prove that a sophisticated civilization existed in these mountains long before Western history claims. Unfortunately, mainstream archaeology has been slow to excavate in Sudan, preferring to focus their resources on the ruins of Rome and Greece. I believe this delay is driven by a deep-seated bias that refuses to acknowledge the antiquity of Black civilization. By keeping the spotlight away from the megaliths of the south, they prevent the world from seeing the physical evidence of the advanced knowledge that Enoch attributes to the instruction of the Watchers. But the stone circles remain, standing as silent witnesses to the Watchers' protection. The natural fortress of the highlands, guarded by their rugged volcanic peaks, kept these ancient monuments safe from the invasions that destroyed the civilizations of the north. I believe that when we look at these stone alignments, we are looking at the physical coordinates, where the faithful Watchers preserved the ancient laws of time. Let us look at how the monastic gatekeepers kept this memory alive. High in the northern mountains of East Africa, a unique group of guardians has spent centuries keeping watch over the ancient texts. These are the Ethiopian Orthodox monks, men who have chosen a life of complete isolation, living in monasteries built on the edges of sheer cliffs. To reach these sacred heights, one must climb ropes of woven leather, ascending hundreds of feet above the valley floor. In these remote sanctuaries, the monks guard ancient libraries that have remained untouched by the wars and changes of the lowlands. Within these stone walls lie the leather prophecies, manuscripts written in the ancient Ge'ez tongue, preserving the words of the prophets with a devotion that has survived for over 1,500 years. The oral history of Enoch is not a dry academic subject for these monks. It is a living tradition, passed down from master to disciple. They speak of Enoch not as a mythological figure, but as an ancestor who walked these very mountains, recording the secrets of the heavens. In their traditions, the Simeon Heights were the landing points of holy messengers, and the scrolls they guard are the physical testimony of that encounter. I've been sitting with these oral histories for a long time, and I believe they represent an unbroken chain of memory that modern history has completely ignored. While the Western world was rewriting the scriptures, these mountain guardians kept the original narrative alive. The ancient preservation of the Ge'ez text in these libraries is a testament to the dedication of these monastic communities. They did not copy the scriptures for political influence. They did so because they believed they were protecting the covenant of the ancestors. The Ge'ez manuscripts they guard contain the complete and uncorrupted Book of Enoch, a text that was lost to the rest of the world for over 1,000 years. I believe this preservation was a divine assignment, a quiet sentinel kept in the mountains of Kush until the hour when the truth would be needed. As we look at these ancient leather pages, we are looking at the coordinates of a heritage that was kept safe for us. The climate of these highlands also played a crucial role in this preservation. The dry mountain air, combined with the sealed stone chambers of the monasteries, prevented the leather manuscripts from decaying. I believe that this physical environment was chosen by design, a natural vault where the sacred records could survive the damp and heat of the lowlands. The monks knew that the preservation of the Ge'ez text was a task of cosmic importance, and they guarded the libraries with their very lives, refusing to let foreign scholars touch the sacred books for centuries. If this geographical journey has opened your eyes to the physical roots of the biblical world, I invite you to participate in this recovery. This is the first CTA, a moment to pause and reflect on the history that was kept from us. I ask you to comment bloodline heritage below, letting me know where you are watching from. This is not just about typing a word. It is about declaring that you are ready to reclaim the inheritance that was preserved in the mountains of Kush. Real talk between you and me. We cannot afford to remain silent while this history is uncovered. I urge you to subscribe right now so you do not miss the upcoming chapters of this revelation. The truth about the Watcher's land is only the beginning of what is written in the ancient Ge'ez manuscripts. By subscribing, you become part of this heritage recovery, supporting the work of bringing these ancient records to light for a generation that is finally waking up. We are tracing a map of your ancestors, and the next revelations will go even deeper into the identities of those who guarded these heights. If you believe that this truth matters, share this video with one person who is studying prophecy seriously. Let us build a network of watchmen who are willing to study the ancient texts for themselves. Comment bloodline heritage now, and let us stand together as we uncover the coordinates of our past. The physical monuments of this heritage are not limited to leather scrolls. They are carved into the very stone of the mountains. The Lalibela rock-cut churches are a marvel of ancient engineering, carved downward into the solid red basalt of the earth. Mainstream history claims these 11 churches were built in the 12th century using primitive iron chisels, but the engineering required to hollow out these monolithic structures from the bedrock suggests a far more advanced knowledge. I believe these stone temples are physical evidence of a technology that was preserved in the highlands. When you stand before the stelae of Axum, massive single blocks of granite rising over 70 feet into the air, the Eurocentric historical narrative completely breaks down. The transport and erection of these monoliths, some weighing over 500 tons, required a sophisticated stone technology that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain. In the oral traditions of the highlands, these monuments were built using principles of acoustic and spiritual levitation, taught by the early messengers. I believe these ruins are the remnants of a civilization that worked under the guidance of the faithful watchers. The carving precision on these granite blocks is equally astonishing. The stelae of Axum do not just rise vertically. They are carved with detailed representations of multi-story buildings, complete with false windows, doors, and lock mechanisms, all rendered in solid stone with geometric perfection. I believe that this level of detail is not the work of simple builders working with Bronze Age tools. It indicates a systematic understanding of geometry and stone carving that matches the instructions given by the angels to Enoch's generation, preserved in the very landscape that was designed to protect the truth. These architectural marvels prove that the history of East Africa is far older and more complex than what is taught in modern textbooks. The rock-cut churches and granite stelae are physical witnesses to a time when the heavens were connected to the earth, when the highlands of Kush were the spiritual capital of the ancient world. By ignoring this stone heritage, mainstream history keeps the world blind to the advanced civilization that built these monuments. I believe we are now in the hour where these stones are crying out, revealing the truth of the Watcher's land. In chapter 77 of 1 Enoch, the text describes the southern region as the place where the 7 mountains are located, mountains that serve as the throne of the Creator. To fully decode this geography, we must link chapter 77 with the detailed description found in Enoch 18. There, the prophet describes a range of 7 mountains, built of precious stones, rising like high towers into the clouds. He writes, "I saw 7 mountains of precious stones, 3 towards the east and 3 towards the south. And those towards the east were of colored stone, one of pearl and one of healing stone, and those towards the south of red stone." This cross-reference shows that the southern mountains were not a random feature, but a planned sanctuary. When Enoch describes the gems of fire that crown these peaks, he is using visual language to depict the unique geological features of the Simeon Range. He speaks of mountains made of sapphire, alabaster, and jacinth, glowing with a divine light in the twilight. I've been sitting with these descriptions, and I believe they correspond to the rich mineral veins and the reflective basalt cliffs of the Ethiopian highlands, which glow with red and gold hues under the setting sun. The ancient writers were not inventing fantasy gemstones. They were describing the physical radiance of these volcanic plateaus, using the most valuable materials they knew to convey the majesty of the holy mountains. When you map this range against the physical geography of East Africa, the alignment of the 7 mountains becomes structurally undeniable. The Simeon Range contains 7 major peaks that dominate the plateau, aligning perfectly with the directions and coordinates listed in the ancient scrolls. This is not a symbolic range that exists only in the spiritual imagination. I believe it is a physical boundary that you can trace on a satellite map today. The text of Enoch is pointing us to a concrete location, a mountain citadel where the faithful watchers were established to guard the gates of the Nile Basin. The strategic defense of the East African highlands explains why this region was selected as a spiritual sanctuary. The massive plateaus, rising thousands of feet above the lowlands, formed a natural barrier that protected the valley from military invasions and cultural assimilation. This isolation from corruption was essential for preserving the original traditions and manuscripts. By placing the faithful watchers in these mountains, the Creator established a secure boundary where the holy laws could be taught and copied without interference from the warring empires of the north. In this geographic layout, the watchers acted as guardians of the gate, protecting the headwaters of the Nile and the covenant boundary of Kush. They were positioned at the key portals where the spiritual and physical worlds met, keeping watch over the sacred landscape. I believe this guardian role was not a temporary assignment. The oral traditions of the monasteries suggest that the spiritual shield established by the faithful messengers is still active today, protecting the highlands from the complete erasure that destroyed the history of other regions. The preservation of this covenant boundary ensured that the ancient records could survive into our generation. The mountains of Kush remained a sanctuary of truth, a place where the scrolls were copied in their original tongue, while the rest of the world fell into darkness. I believe that when we study this geography, we are not looking at dead history. We are looking at a living shield that was designed to protect the sacred lineage until the hour of the awakening. I have to admit, my theological shift on this topic did not happen overnight. I used to view the portal concept as pure science fiction, a fantasy element that had no place in serious biblical study. I believed that spiritual portals were the inventions of modern novels, dismissing the idea of physical locations holding divine energy. But as I spent time researching the scriptures and the physical geography of the highlands, I realized my training had blinded me to the biblical reality of holy ground. The scriptures are full of examples of physical locations that serve as portals for divine encounter. When Moses stood before the burning bush, he was told to take off his sandals because the ground was holy. This was not a symbolic holiness. It was a physical space charged with divine presence. I believe the mountains of the south function in this same way, serving as holy ground where the boundary between the heavens and the earth is uniquely thin. Recognizing this biblical reality forces us to reframe how we view the Watcher's dwelling place. But let me offer a direct warning to anyone who seeks to explore these portals out of mere curiosity or a desire for spiritual power. I warn you against seeking these portals without a heart of faith and submission to the Creator. These are holy spaces, guarded by vigilant forces, and they are not tourist sites for intellectual speculation. The awakening we are experiencing is a return to covenant responsibility, not an invitation to seek supernatural experiences. Walk in truth, and respect the boundaries that were established from the beginning. When we look at the oldest descriptions of these holy messengers in the Ge'ez manuscripts, the visual imagery is striking. The texts describe the Watchers not as pale, wispy entities, but as powerful beings with the black skin of the Watchers, reflecting a deep, dark hue that carried a divine radiance. In these ancient accounts, their appearance was associated with majesty and power, their skin described as having the luster of polished bronze or dark volcanic stone. This was not a depiction of spiritual emptiness. It was a portrayal of celestial authority anchored in a physical dark-skinned form that matched the original inhabitants of the Nile Valley. The alignment between the appearance of the faithful messengers and the chosen lineage is one of the most suppressed revelations in theology. In the Book of Enoch, the visual description of these celestial beings mirrors the physical characteristics of the covenant people, establishing a direct link between the guardians of the portals and the ancient family of Cush. They shared the same dark complexion, the same majestic stature, and the same inheritance of the sacred heights. I believe this visual mirroring was designed to show that the covenant family was created in the image of the celestial order, carrying a physical and spiritual connection that no system of oppression could erase. This revelation completely shatters the Eurocentric angelic narrative that has dominated Western art and theology for centuries. For generations, the Church has depicted angels exclusively as pale, European figures, reinforcing a system of hierarchy that placed the dark-skinned peoples of the earth at the bottom of the spiritual ladder. But the ancient Ge'ez manuscripts, preserved in the mountains of Ethiopia, present a very different witness. They show us that the guardians of the throne The vigilant ones who never sleep carry the very skin color that the Western Church has spent centuries trying to demean. I believe we are now in the hour where this Eurocentric lens is being broken, and the true, dark-skinned majesty of the biblical messengers is finally being revealed to those who are willing to see. Real talk, this isn't just about ancient maps or stone monuments. This is about your life today. We are looking at a stolen heritage that was systematically stripped from the African diaspora during the centuries of exile. When they took your name, your history, and your language, they disconnected you from the physical lands where your ancestors walked with the messengers of God. I believe this disconnection was a deliberate effort to make you forget the power that was sealed in your heritage. The mountains of Kush, where the faithful watchers were established, are directly linked to your ancestral home. The very blood that runs in your veins is connected to the scribes who copied these Ge'ez manuscripts, and the monks who guarded the sacred heights. I believe the awakening we are witnessing in this generation is not a political movement. It is a prophecy unfolding, a recovery of the bloodline that was scattered across the four winds of the earth. When you reclaim this history, you are returning to the covenant that was preserved for you in the high valleys of East Africa. I want you to really hear what I am saying. The awakening is a return to your original position. You are not just descendants of slaves. You are the heirs of the covenant that was protected by the vigilant ones in the mountains of Kush. By connecting the ancient text to your modern reality, you discover that your survival is not a coincidence, but a part of the divine pattern. Let us stand in that truth and refuse to accept the narrative of defeat that has been taught to us for so long. Remember when the explorer James Bruce traveled to Abyssinia in 1773, searching for the source of the Nile? He did not just find the river. He brought back 3 complete Ge'ez manuscripts of the Book of Enoch, introducing them to a Europe that had declared the text lost for centuries. I believe this event was a key turning point, a physical sign that the time capsule kept in the mountains of Kush was ready to be opened. The Western world could no longer pretend that geography was a myth, because they held the physical records in their hands, preserved by the very monks who lived on the sacred heights. Now, as we prepare to close this chapter of our journey, let me offer a word of humility. Scholars have weighed these texts for centuries and disagree on much. What I've offered is one careful reading, verifiable in the citations of the Ge'ez manuscripts and the physical geography of the Simeon Range. I encourage you to study the primary sources for yourself, to look at the maps and the scriptures with your own eyes. The Christian tradition holds many interpretations, and my goal is not to divide, but to invite you to search for the truth. Study the history, look at the archaeological evidence, and let your own heart guide you. I believe that when you search the sources for yourself, the pattern will become clear, bridging the gap between the ancient covenants and your modern destiny. Let us now prepare to seal this truth with a moment of prayer, seeking the strength to walk in the heritage that has been restored to us today. This is the second CTA, our final call to action before we enter into our closing prayer. I invite you to subscribe for truth today, joining the community of watchers who are dedicated to recovering the forgotten history of our people. By subscribing, you ensure that you will receive the next chapter of this journey, where we will dive even deeper into the prophecies that are unlocking in our generation. If this message resonated with you, I urge you to share the video with those in your circle who are ready to wake up to their bloodline inheritance. Real talk, the work of restoration requires each of us to act as a messenger of the truth. Share this video directly with one person who is studying these mysteries, helping them connect the ancient scrolls to their modern identity. We are building a foundation of knowledge that cannot be erased, and your share is a crucial part of that mission. I want you to think about the legacy you are leaving for the next generation. For decades, our children have been taught a version of history that begins in chains, completely ignoring the kings, the prophets, and the celestial guardians that were written into our story. By sharing this truth, you are not just educating them, you are giving them back their crown, providing a solid foundation of evidence that they can stand on with pride. This is our legacy mission, a quiet restoration that starts in the heart and spreads through the bloodline. Let us now transition into our sacred time of prayer, sealing these revelations in our hearts and seeking the divine protection that guarded our ancestors in the mountains of Kush. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the preservation of these ancient records and for revealing the Watcher's land to a generation that is ready to hear the truth. We thank you for the faithful messengers who guarded the southern portals, keeping the covenant safe through the dark ages of history. We pray for a special blessing on truth seekers watching this today, asking that you grant them the wisdom and strength to walk in their restored heritage. We ask for divine justice to descend upon this earth, exposing the lies that have kept your people in darkness for so long. May your light pierce through the systems of oppression, bringing vindication to the scattered remnant. Strengthen our hearts, protect our families, and bless us with the power of our ancestral calling. We seal this prayer in the name of the Creator. Amen. Walk in truth. You are free. The content presented on Dark History is based on historical texts, alternative interpretations, and theological research for educational and entertainment purposes. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research and form their own conclusions.